Is the RSF finishing a genocide? 20 years ago, Sudan's Janjaweed militia swept through Darfur, committing atrocities that shocked the world. Today, the renamed Rapid Support Forces continue their violent campaign in Fasher and Kordofan. With tens of thousands dead and thousands more in danger, can the RSF be stopped? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Sudan. Well, almost 1 year ago, we asked what would be the cost of ignoring the brutal conflict in Western Sudan. Well, failure to find a solution has meant 11 more months of atrocities committed on a scale that many define as genocide. It's also meant the RSF was able to capture Darfur's city of Fasher and has its sights on North Kordofan. Again, the region is gaining the world's attention over the severe humanitarian crisis and the brutal deaths of tens of thousands of people. And though the U.S., Egypt, Saudi, and the UAE are working on a peace agreement, many argue the so-called Quad's competing national interests make it doomed to fail. Here's a look.
Unimaginable atrocities are unfolding in Sudan's Fasher. Since the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces captured the city in Darfur last month, reports of killings, rape, and abuse have been mounting. In one incident, the World Health Organization said gunmen killed 460 people in a maternity hospital and kidnapped several medical workers. Tens of thousands have fled Fasher, most of them making the dangerous journey on foot.
The Rapid Support Forces have beaten and humiliated us. They took all that we had and left us with nothing. We found bodies and others that they were beating and taking their belongings from, and lots of bodies on the ground.
They've arrived at the already overcrowded camp in Tawila, where there's not enough food or shelter. After enduring an 18-month siege, many are now traumatized and malnourished.
100% of the children are malnourished, with about half suffering from severe malnutrition. What we are seeing is truly dramatic. The situation is also concerning among adults, since malnutrition affects adults as well, not only children, which reflects the overall nutritional status and the lack of access to basic necessities in Fasher.
As many as 200,000 people are still trapped in the city, with history threatening to repeat itself in the worst possible way. In 2003, Janjaweed militias, led by the RSF leader Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hamedi, killed hundreds of thousands in Darfur. 2.5 million people were displaced, and the International Criminal Court accused the militias of genocide against non-Arab populations. The perpetrators behind those atrocities have risen to power over the years. In 2019, Hamedi and the army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan overthrew President Omar al-Bashir. And later, they staged a coup that ended Sudan's democratic transition. But a power struggle between the two escalated into a brutal civil war in 2023. Since then, the misery in Sudan has only worsened. Last week, the RSF also intensified attacks on the region of Kordofan. A drone strike on a funeral killed at least 40 people in its capital, El Ubaid, a key city connecting Khartoum and Darfur.
Killing has not been limited to Darfur. Fierce fighting in North Kordofan state is driving new waves of displacement and endangering the humanitarian response, including around the state capital, El Ubaid.
The paramilitary group has said it accepted a ceasefire proposal from the US and Arab nations last week, but none of the previous efforts have succeeded in more than 2.5 years of war. Peace initiatives led by the US, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, who are known as the Quad, have also been derailed by the group's internal rift, with Cairo and Riyadh backing Sudan's army, and the UAE having allegedly supported the RSF. Now, many are asking if the fall of Fasher could see Sudan eventually split into two, a result that could plunge the country into even more chaos, while its people desperately yearn for peace.
Well, joining me now to share her insight on the humanitarian crisis in Sudan is Advocacy Manager at the Norwegian Refugee Council, Mathilde Vu. Mathilde, thank you so much for being with me. You know, we're hearing reports of mass executions, mass rapes and torture, people held for ransom amid conditions of famine and cholera, and then little, if no humanitarian assistance is able to get in. We spoke to you almost a year ago about what was happening in the region, and you were describing atrocities then. Did you think you would be back here almost a year later speaking about the same thing on this level again?
To say, I'm not surprised. And nobody, no humanitarian organization, no human rights organization, and frankly, no civilian in Darfur is surprised with what is happening right now. What is happening is a complete calculated campaign of destruction, and we have been raising the alarm for 18 months. This comes after 500 days and more of siege, of constant bombing of civilian infrastructures, people being starved to the point that they had to rely on like animal food in order to survive, humanitarian assistance being blocked into Fasher. And, you know, the feeling now is such disappointment that, you know, the international community was not able to galvanize enough momentum, enough political pressure on the warring parties and their backers to ensure that this bloodshed that we're seeing right now was not happening. So no, I'm not surprised, and I'm very sorry to say that.
Mathilde, can you express an opinion on why you think it's been allowed to get this bad?
To be very frank with you, I have no excuse for the international community to have neglected Sudan for so long. This is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. You just said it. It's also with a famine. This is also where we see one of the largest displacement crises in the world. Atrocities being committed, entire cities being choked to the point where civilians have to take this deadly gamble of like fleeing and then being attacked on the way. And yet, you know, it hasn't really taken, you know, the attention that we want at the level that we want, at very high level. And people in Darfur realize that, and they tell me that they feel neglected and forgotten, and they're right.
So then what needs to be done now just to get basic aid to people suffering on the ground?
What's important right now is protection of civilian and humanitarian access. And you know, these are the basic rules of war. In time of war, you need to ensure that this should not be conditioned to any ceasefire. At the moment, we have hundreds of thousands of people that may be missing, in a sense of like, there's, before the fall of Fasher, 200,000 people were trapped in Fasher. Right now, my team in Tawila, which is 60 kilometers away from Fasher, are telling me that only 8,000 people have reached safety. Where is everybody? We need people to be safe to move. That's one. And then we need assistance to reach them in a very independent way, in a very fast way right now, because people are thirsty to the point of, you know, dying, hungry to the point of dying, traumatized, injured to a level that is, frankly, like, I have no word for that.
So if the momentum of the RSF continues as it has, who will need help next? And is there any way to be proactive for aid workers if they continue as they have? Because we know security for aid workers on the ground has been disastrous.
You know, we're talking about a country with 33 million people in need. Everybody across Sudan is in need and in dire need. And on the other side, the response is 70% gap. So about who needs assistance? Everyone. Who can receive assistance? Barely no one. Even my organization, we have to take these heartbreaking choices of trying to figure out who are we going to help. For example, in Tawila, are we going to help the ones who arrived yesterday, or are we going to help the ones who arrived 2 or 3 weeks ago? As for the protection of aid workers across Sudan, but especially in Darfur, it hasn't been respected. Local responders, especially those volunteers who've like risked their lives for 18 months in Fasher, they're being targeted right now. And back again to the rule of war, there's one which is don't kill the ones who save lives, This is basic rule of international humanitarian law and must be respected as well.
Mathilde Vu, we will have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. So let's broaden out the discussion now and look at what's behind the massive escalation in violence. And joining me from Warsaw, strategic advisor to the president of the Liberal Party of Sudan, Adil Abdel Ati. From Cairo, political analyst and commentator, Dalia Abdel Monaim. And from Washington, Africa Program Senior Associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Cameron Hudson. Thanks all so much for being with me. Dalia, I'll begin with you. How are we here today still discussing atrocities, even genocide, after this long? What has failed, particularly over the past year?
Failure has come from the lack of political will to find an end to this war, or to even allow for the most basic of humanitarian aid to get through to those who are in need of it most. The conflict in Sudan has fallen by the wayside. It's been, other conflicts have taken over in terms of attention. And at the same time, the backers of both armies, it suits them fine that there was no attention brought onto this conflict. And this is why we are where we are today. What's happened in Fasher and what's happening in other areas in Sudan, we as Sudanese and other, Sudan experts and, people involved, we've been calling out. We knew this would happen. It's not a surprise at all at what's taking place right now, at the videos that we're seeing and all the reports that are coming out. And it will get worse. It will not get any better, simply because there is, like I said, there's no political will or desire to bring an end to this war. Both sides have said a lot of things, but they say it, but they don't follow up on it in terms of action. The RSF said they're willing to accept the ceasefire or the truce so they can allow humanitarian aid, but they say one thing and they do something else. And so this is where we are today. I mean,
okay.
Unfortunately, no solution in sight.
Then let me ask Adil if you agree there, and how far do you think this can go? The RSF, as we said before, has already taken out Fasher, but how much further can they actually go before potentially being spread too thin? Is it just a question of they're maintaining their weapon supplies to continue this campaign, or if weapon supplies in particular are cut, could this all be put to a stop?
What happened in Al-Fasher happened before in Al-Junaina, and it happened in Khartoum, it happened in Al Jazeera. So it is not a surprise, as all the previous speakers said. RSF will not stop until it is recognized as a terrorist organization, because what they are doing is a terror. It is not fighting, it is not a war against the army, even it is not a war, it is against the Sudanese state. It is a war against civilians, against Sudanese people. This will not stop unless very harsh sanctions will be embodied on RSF. RSF should be recognized as a terrorist organization, and all weapon supplies and logistic supplies should be stopped to reach them.
Okay, let me ask for Cameron's opinion there, and also if there is a new motivation now from the United States, and what impetus does the United States have to put any pressure on any of the parties involved in this conflict?
Well, clearly there's a new impetus by Washington to try to resolve this, because we've seen in the last month or so an effort by the president's senior advisor for Africa, Mathilde Vu, to convene the parties, to convene the Quad members, that's Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt. There's been multiple meetings going back to the summer, and there's been a statement that the Quad issued in September outlining a kind of a roadmap for the future of Sudan that includes a 3-month ceasefire and a 9-month civilian transition. Again, those figures, those numbers are not really grounded in anything on the ground. Clearly, there's no real will by either of the parties to try to seriously curtail their fighting. They came to Washington earlier this month to negotiate the ceasefire agreement. It did not go anywhere. So I think that they are going through the motions. And quite frankly, I think that even the United States is not treating this in the way that it has treated other successful peace mediations. If you look at what happened in Gaza, if you look at the DRC, for example, even in Ukraine, you're seeing the president and the secretary of state personally involved, hosting meetings, picking up the phone, cajoling leaders. They've done none of that in the case of Sudan. As a matter of fact, they are trying to keep their friends and allies close without offending them, while at the same time trying to achieve peace in Sudan. And I think ultimately those are incompatible goals. They are going to have to confront countries like the United Arab Emirates, which is responsible for fueling the rapid support forces. They are going to have to confront them if we want this war to end.
And if they don't, what will ultimately be the consequences, Cameron?
The consequences will be the same as the last 18 months or worse. The RSF is only in this fight to this day because of the support of the RSF. They would have lost this battle long before. This has been a massive operational airlift to support the RSF on remote control from Abu Dhabi. And so if that were to end, I think we could see a relatively quick end to the active fighting. But that doesn't seem to be on the horizon right now.
And Dalia, there are so many kind of chains of command involved here. And there have been a lot of complaints now out of the United Kingdom that it is UK weapons that are being sold to the parties involved in this conflict, and complaints that the UK really doesn't have any intention to stop those weapon supplies. And as most agree, without weapons, this conflict really can't continue as it is. So is the power really held at the very top levels of the global brokers?
I wouldn't say it's held by them, but they certainly have a huge say in what happens and what unfolds in Sudan. I mean, end of the day, when it comes to arms sales, if the check clears, people will sell. And it's not just that the British, who have been selling weapons to the UAE, who are then in turn have supplied it to the RSF. It's also the likes of Canadian firms and others, so Chinese firms as well. So as long as there is no penalization for those who continuously to flaunt the arms embargo on Darfur, and as long as the arms are being allowed to get into Darfur and get into Sudan in general, also for SAF, then this war will continue, because this is the mechanism that allows the war machine to continue to trudge along. And like I said previously, there is no will to bring an end to this war. I mean,
But as you say, there's no will. I mean, is it completely, as you say, there's no will, is it completely cynical that the so-called Quad is even sitting down to talk about this? I mean,
absolutely.
Really?
I mean, how can you discuss the future of a country while at the same time all the countries in this Quad are supplying and helping this war to push along, to continue, in the likes of the UAE and Egypt, for example, specifically those two countries? So it doesn't make sense. And at the same time, unfortunately, from our side, the Sudanese, the civilian front isn't as unified nor as strong as we wanted them to be. And they are not being given a seat at the table, along with, other entities within the Sudanese political scene. And so we're being dictated to by two armies, and at the same time, those two armies are being dictated to by their backers. And on top of all of that, you have Washington, who, like Cameron just said, doesn't have much interest in Sudan and is not really pushing it. They have, at least the Trump administration have had, Bulus as the envoy, but I feel that his powers are somewhat limited. And as long as the UAE is fine and they can't rock that boat, because the UAE is a very strategic partner, not just to the US, but to European countries as well, who's going to force them to do something or to take action.
Adil, if we look again at what's actually on the ground right now in Sudan, help us understand really what the end game is for the RSF. They're capturing Fasher and then, raising the flag of freedom, as they say, after they've committed massacres of tens of thousands of innocent people. What do they ultimately want? What is their vision for Sudan going forward?
RSF is not a political party. It is an armed group, and it was like, armed group against the rebels in Darfur. And they did not develop any political agenda. What they are talking, they are changing their agenda. At the beginning, they were talking about restoring democracy. After that, they were speaking about marginalization of Western Sudan. And now they are talking about a new government. So they don't have a political agenda. I think that they are just a satellite for regional powers, specifically the United Arab Emirates. What the United Arab Emirates they need from Sudan? They want to control Sudan. They want to control the political future of Sudan, eliminating what they are calling Islamists in Sudan. They also want access to cheap resources of Sudan, gold, land, and ports. So we have to ask ourselves what the United Arab Emirates wants from Sudan, not what RSF is wanting from Sudan, because really RSF, they are not clear about their political agenda. We are not sure if they want secession, if they want United Sudan, if they want secular Sudan, if they want Islamic Sudan, because it is not clear in their political agenda.
I mean, Cameron, is that true? And if so, I mean, how do you rein in an organization, a militia like the RSF? Do they have to eventually kind of destroy themselves from the inside, which some might say is happening with the arrest of Abu Lulu? Or is there another way to go about it? Or do you disagree entirely and believe they do have a political agenda or some kind of agenda here?
Well, no, I don't think that there's much of a political agenda. I think they have a survival agenda, and their survival depends on the international community's willingness to recognize the legitimacy of their hold over Darfur and their legitimacy as a government. And so these arguments that, America and others make about we're worried about the partition of Sudan, we don't have to worry about the partition of Sudan as long as we don't recognize the claims that the RSF has over areas under their immediate control. So I think that there is a way to arrest the work of the UAE. Obviously, it starts with ending their supply lines from the UAE and from others. It requires also having real conversations with the governments in Chad, in Libya, in Central African Republic, in South Sudan, all countries where weapons and fighters are coming in over the border in support of the RSF. So to cut those supply lines, even if that means, again, angering the UAE, which is in the background of all of those countries, there can be sanctions used as well. I think specifically we need to use sanctions against the gold that is flowing out of RSF-held areas. If the RSF is earning upwards of $2 billion a year or more from illicit gold sales, then even without the UAE backing them, they're going to have the money to continue to buy black market weapons. And so their supply lines have to be severed by severing the gold profits that they're making. So we really need a comprehensive strategy. That's what I'm talking about here. It's diplomatic, it's financial, it's security. And right now we have, we don't even have the makings of a strategy to disarm and demobilize the RSF. And I would just remind everyone that that's when this war started. The war started when the RSF and the Sudanese army were in negotiations about what a demobilization program would look like, how we would incorporate the RSF into the army. So this is, I think, the most, consequential issue for the future of the country.
Yeah. Very quickly, though, Cameron, we only have a minute left. I mean, having said how comprehensive a real plan would need to be, because there are so many elements involved here, is there an issue, especially in the United States, of all of this being sold as a simple Christian versus Muslim conflict? And it always has been. But is that perhaps an advantage when it comes to someone like President Trump, who takes, some would argue, a very personal interest in defending a certain religion in certain countries and following that dynamic?
Well, I haven't heard this dynamic explained in the Christian-Muslim divide the way he's trying to impose on a place like Nigeria right now. But I do think that the African-Arab divide is certainly one. We're seeing a further ethnic dimension to the fighting that's been going on. But again, I think that as for Trump's involvement in this, it's about what he can gain personally. And if there is a deal for that improves his political standing, then I think he will pursue it. But again, he's going to have to confront his friends and allies who he needs for other, I think, more consequential issues. And so where that trade-off happens is where peace will be made in Sudan.
Dalia, your quick final thoughts on that?
I agree. I think the religious line, it can't be used simply because the majority of Sudan right now is Muslim on Muslim, and they're the ones who are killing Sudanese are Muslim, both Muslim armies, but there has to be something that can be offered up to the Trump administration to pique their interest and have a more concerted effort to try and bring an end to this war, because end of this day, nothing else is going to happen. I mean, unfortunately, the United States is the only country that can actually apply pressure on the backers and on both armies to somehow lay down their arms and allow, for peace.
Dalia, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.